What's up, guys? My name is Mike and welcome back to a very special, very special edition of Let's Play Hearts of Iron 4, our Learn About Canada episodes. So let's take a moment to get organized here. We're going to try to surround these Italian idiots. These nice Italian folks here. We are desperately low on manpower. So we're going to have to go up in our conscription one step further. Limited to extensive. Yes, it's going to increase our training time, but it's also going to double our manpower pool. We're going to have to do that. Get ourselves another 270k. Our divisions are unfortunately quite underpowered at this time, so we're going to have to do our best to make the best use of them. Like I said, we'll try to encircle these guys to give ourselves some breathing room. So these Italians are trying to leave. We don't want them to leave, so we're going to pin them down. I'm also going to shorten this front line. Make yourselves nice and agile. Come on. God damn it. There we go. Nice and agile, like so. And these Canadians are doing their thing. Alright, so September 10th of 1939, Canada officially enters the war. Officially declares war on Great Britain. However, it wasn't until nearly 2 years later that Canada actually saw any action. So there's a couple of things that went on here. First of all, they immediately sent over divisions to go sit in Britain. But at that point, the Brits had already been kicked out of Europe and were basically just chilling in the UK, southern UK. So the Brits had landed forces in France to kind of meet the Germans head on after the Germans kind of wheeled around from Poland to go attack into France. But they couldn't get over there fast enough and ended up having to retreat off the shores of France back to the UK with just fears of obviously being completely overrun and being trapped between the sea and this onslaught of German forces. My guys are completely out of organization. They're going to have to just calm the fuck down. I'm going to take half of them and bring them back here where it's slightly better. Nope. Go here and then back up here. So to sort of support the European effort, there was a lot of hullabaloo about, Canada going over and joining the war. So, they sent over basically the entire Canadian army, 2 divisions. And then these guys basically just sat there in the UK for years and years. They just sat there, almost 3 years in total, doing absolutely nothing. Well, they did a lot of things, but nothing that was particularly productive. But we'll get into that a bit later. So the Canadian troops go over there. They're chilling out in the UK, and they realize very quickly a number of things. So first of all, that sort of 9-day waiting period between Canada declaring war, or rather between the UK declaring war and Canada declaring war, actually turned out to be pretty fortuitous because technically in those 9 days, Canada was still neutral in the war, as was the US. So the US was able to, in that short amount of time, supply Canada with some much needed Air Force. They supplied them with some of their old obsolete planes. True story, what happened was in order to circumvent any sort of neutrality violations, what the Americans did is they basically pulled up these unused, obsolete planes up to the border and walked away with them. And then Canadians on the other side of the border then came down, stood on the Canadian side of the border between the US and Canada, threw lassos across the border to hook the planes, and then dragged them over the border. So technically, there was no neutrality violations in order for the Americans to help Canada boost its much diminished Air Force. So, obviously between the 2 wars, Canada's Army, Navy, Air Force, everything was essentially in complete tatters. When they were originally starting to conscript, or even just like starting to train the troops up, they realized they didn't even have enough uniforms for everybody. The uniforms they were breaking out of storage for all these new soldiers they were trying to recruit were from World War I. They were moth-bitten. They were basically in complete tatters. And, they were using Great War weapons. They had no ammunition. It was just a complete disaster. So, this was... oh, there we go. Japanese are doing something in Scandinavia and in Berlin. Let's see, what are we going to do? We're going to grab technology sharing. We want that extra research slot while we continue to build up factories. 11 more factories, and then we can get yet another research slot. We got to get 50 factories before we can get the second research slot. So we are continually building factories to get there. What was I saying? So, the army was in complete disarray. Then, like, the entire military forces of Canada was in complete disarray because they weren't necessary during the Great Depression, of course. And, you know, Luxembourg was puppeted. That was a separate war. And the Canadian government didn't have any money to maintain a proper army during the Great Depression, so it was a complete disarray between the two wars, and essentially had to start from scratch. Now, I mean, having seen the poor, sorry state of affair of the Canadian military right at the declaration of World War II, there we go. Looks like there's more people joining at either side. The Mackenzie King basically assembled a superstar team, probably the strongest cabinet, with maybe like one or two exceptions, that Canadian politics has ever seen. So some of the most intelligent, most fiery, most connected Canadians from across the country who essentially fill all these cabinet positions in his government. You probably won't recognize any of the names unless you are fucking Poland's done. Poland's done. Come on, boys, gotta fight back. We're doing our part down here. You won't recognize any of the names unless you're familiar with Canadian politics at that time. It's not really important to know the names. But like I said, basically just like the NBA all-star lineup of politicians, military leaders, everything. He was a unifier in that sense. Again, Mackenzie King, not so charismatic, but a great politician, and had a great many strengths when it came to outwitting and, you know, outplaying his opponents, his political opponents, and making himself that much stronger. And that really proved itself very, very early on in the war. So the war economy in Canada then came in to full swing, right? At the end of the Great Depression, you're looking at like 500,000 people unemployed, to the point where there were, you know, serious manpower issues, not only to, like, you know, keep the farms occupied, but later in the war when they decided to go up to 5 divisions, which was, you know, 500,000 men in the field, actual like fighting men, which was completely insane for a country so small with only a population of like 10 million. We talked about at the very beginning. I mean, it was just like they were seriously worried about the amount of manpower they would need. But nonetheless, things got started off tremendously fast. And this is also, of course, where women became, you know, hugely involved in the war effort, rather. Benghazi, an infamous Benghazi. So, I mean, obviously up until that point, women still had a very traditional role in terms of just staying at home, cranking out babies, whatever. But now they were fully involved in the actual war industry, in factories, shipbuilding. I mean, a single shipyard in Vancouver went up to like 80,000 employees from something like 5,000 virtually overnight, like almost overnight. You're talking about a huge increase in manpower in manufacturing across the whole spectrum. I mean, the uniforms were one of the first things that they made, and the women that were actually in these textile factories that were, you know, a lot of volunteers were in these textile factories. Not volunteers, they were getting paid, but they basically just signed up to work in these things, to get out of their homes to contribute. They were leaving little notes in the pockets of the uniforms, things like, you know, God bless and good luck and stuff like that. And then the military intelligence at the time, when they were doing the final inspections, thought they might have been coded secret spy messages, and ended up pulling all the messages out, you know, afraid that maybe there was some sort of like infiltration already going on. Of course, at the time, there's still a lot of German sympathizers and Japanese sympathizers in Canada. Of course, that was bullshit. It was just like these you know, industrious women trying to bolster the enthusiasm of the male soldiers. Anyway, so war industry goes into overtime. They start to build tanks. They start to build guns, planes, boats. Nothing went to waste. I mean, it was almost immediate turnover, where the public itself was so against waste, so against, we'll go special forces. I think that's a good idea. Against everything. I mean, there were scandals in the government where a prominent, I forget what her position was, a prominent female political figure showed up at like a political dinner, and she was wearing an orchid, like a flower, on her dress, and got fucking skewered. They lambasted her for wasting resources. There was some sort of politician, and again, this is what happens when you go by memory, I don't remember what his position was, who got in the news because he was trying to send a letter first class, and it was considered to be a waste of resources to have this letter taking up space, taking up manpower, because the letter would have to be separately inspected from the regular mail on like a commercial flight. So like, it was just an insane amount of just public outpouring for, you know, this immediate and overnight war effort, where all of Canada really came together all of a sudden. You know, you weren't allowed to waste rubber. Like, if you threw away a tire, you'd get beaten in the streets. It was just crazy an almost overnight switch in terms of the mentality of the country. Very similar to like virtually all other countries, but just the speed at which Canada went to a full war economy was staggering. So all good. Everything seemed going well, except for the fact that all these Canadian soldiers were now stuck in Britain, southern Britain, with nothing to do, with absolutely nothing to do. And it came time to the point where who's justifying war goals? Fucking German Reich, you assholes. We're already at war with you, idiot. Why are you wasting your time? Stupid fuck. With these Canadian soldiers with nothing to do, and there was already some sort of like outcry in terms of, well, we need our soldiers to do something. So the first official sort of war, actual fight, white peace. That's good. Is that good? That's good, I think. Well, it would have been nicer if Finland had been capitulated to the Soviets, because the Soviets are eventually going to be our pseudo-allies. But I guess we'll just have to wait. And there's German soldiers down here, so they haven't taken France yet, so that's a good thing. And we're beating the shit out of Italy, so we're still doing well. So there was some outcry in terms of, we need to give the Canadian soldiers something to do. And what Britain's idea came up with was Hong Kong. So Hong Kong was a strategic hotspot, and at that point the Japanese weren't yet at war with Britain or with the Allies. They were still fighting their war against the Chinese, and the Chinese were seen as being sort of the underdog, rebellious types against the very aggressive and warlike Japanese. But Britain was really concerned about Hong Kong. Hong Kong, of course, being a holding in sort of southern China, a British like colony up until like 93 was actually considered to be a British colony. And the Brits were really concerned about this, but they didn't want to say they were concerned about this. So there was a lot of ignorance when it came to the war, and about what Japan's ultimate sort of motivation and goal here was going to be. So the Brits, and Mackenzie King was, to his credit, was kind of like, this doesn't make sense. So the Brits are telling us the Japanese aren't going to go to war with us, yet they're asking us for 2 regiments to come over and guard Hong Kong. And when you press them and saying like, well, why do you need regiments if you're not worried about being attacked? It was just kind of like, well, we just want to make sure we don't get attacked. Like, it was just like circular round and round logic that made no sense. And yet the pressure from home to get involved in the war with our division sitting at home in Britain doing nothing was high enough that this eventually went forward with, unfortunately, disastrous results, to the point where the first Canadian conflict of the war ended up being a source of tremendous embarrassment. But we're gonna have to get into that to the next episode, about how the Canadians fought, how we got into this, and what was eventually the fate of the defense of Hong Kong in the next episode. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Much love, big kisses, and we'll see you soon.